Hello, everyone. It's nice to see your faces, some new and some old. We'll give just a couple more minutes for people to join. If you're here now, I would invite you to get yourself a really big glass of water. And of course, you're free to sip on it during the call, but at the end, we're going to have a little bit of a blessing of that water. So make sure to leave yourself some for the end. And we're just going to wait about 1 more minute. So if there's anything else you need, a journal, a pen, an extra cushion, or a shawl to be really comfortable, now is a good time to grab that. All right. So welcome, everyone. This is our May monthly support circle. It's a new thing that we're doing that we're really loving because we feel like we can gather with whoever is going through some of the same things that we are and just feel the transpersonal invitation and sometimes less shame or isolation in our challenges, especially in this time. And then if folks can't meet us on this day, the recording is available kind of forever. So if down the road you have friends that you feel like are going through these kinds of things that we end up talking about today later, you can always just refer them to our Patreon. And we're getting a lot of really positive feedback about people who tune in with the conversation later and really have the full experience that we're having live. So thank you for meeting us in this new experimental way of sharing that just feels really good for us and accessible to more folks. So the topic of today's circle is Initiatrix, because I believe that's what we become when we do the inner work and make the inner commitments to becoming a person who can initiate truthful, respectful, evolutionary conversations. So it happens spontaneously, often through grace, that we might have a moment to bite our tongue in a conversation or listen for just 10 seconds longer before we react or respond. We hear something new, we reach a deeper understanding. Most of us have had experiences like that in life where some medicine or some blessing or someone else holding space for us brought forth a deeper connection, a deeper level of intimacy. And so I think it's a really beautiful path and choice to go through the work and the trials and the lessons to become that person whose communications and relationships are medicine. And so A couple little housekeeping things. It sounds as if everybody is just muted and looking through the squares. I like to put it on the gallery view personally, but you're welcome to put it on speaker view. If in the upper right hand corner, there's a little grid, just based on your attention span. If it helps you to just look at the speaker, great. But when I put it on gallery view, I'm often able to see a lot of people's faces at once, and it feels much more like we're in a circle together when we can see each other's body language or responses, even though we're muted. And so when we call for sharing, I'll usually remind people, would you like to unmute yourself and share? But if I forget that, that if you just start talking without going down to the little lower left-hand corner of your screen and clicking on the microphone, then we won't hear you. And it really just keeps it tolerable to not have the background noise. And one last little technical thing before we go in is that we recently moved to the top of a mountain. It's a dream, and it's a real challenge to figure out how to be here. And so we have our assistant has initiated the call from a place in town with better internet so that if my connection drops out, the whole call will not drop out. And we've tested this a few times. It's worked really well. But just so you know, if I go away in the middle of speaking, I'll be back in a couple seconds. And if we continue to have this interference, then I'll just request that everybody shut their video off, and that usually takes care of it. But it's best if we can see each other's faces. So we're going to start out on that foot and know that we have options, and it does work, even though our communication is going all the way out into space and then back. So there may be a short delay. All right, all of that being said, I drew a couple of cards to guide us from the beginning, and I want to share those now, just to help set a container and share the energies that I feel are present around these intentions. And the first one is the Queen of Rods, or Wands, and Wands really are about communication. So it felt like a big confirmation to say that, like, we're the people who would like to really become effective communicators, and maybe more than effective, maybe masterful. And so this archetype is a warm, open, communicative, likable person who is effective and also has a no nonsense side, and is, I believe, balanced in within herself, and has an energy of sovereignty. And then our animal ally is Hawk, which also brought out that element of, there's a solitary element to both of them. And so it might sound ironic in a gathering about relating, and it feels perfect, a little bit paradoxical and tantric for me, that I believe in order to relate in a really good way, that we do have to have some level of sovereignty within ourselves, and capacity to be alone, which enables us to give up the goal of keeping the relationship and be goalless in the exploration and find the true iteration of right relationship. So just acknowledging our guides of autonomy and sovereignty within a relational, interconnected paradigm. And so if you've sat with us before, any circle or class or ritual or healing that we ever do starts with an open forum for sharing, so that we have a better understanding of the actual needs of this group of people in the space, and not just what we think are the 5 most important things about communication or whatever. So because when we have a large group, it's not really possible for our human attention spans to hear everybody. In a larger group like this, we just open it up, and whoever feels most compelled to share can share. And usually by the time we have a handful of shares, people start to feel like other people are singing their song, are sharing their issue, are experiencing the same things, and safe to not necessarily have to share our exact version of the story. So I think that typically we're able to cover the most important things in, about a half an hour of sharing. So I'm going to open that up now. And because we have I have 3 screens worth of you, which I just want to say, wow, thank you. It's really amazing that there's this many people that want to grow in this department. And so there is a way to raise your hand. I typically get a little distracted by the buttons. So I'm just going to try asking you to raise your actual hand, and I will look through the screens. So if you feel like you'd really like to share what drew you to this conversation, what is alive in you, maybe that's a challenge going on in your life, or an interest that you have, something in the past, something that's present, something that you would like to develop in the future. Um, why are you personally sitting in this seat today in this circle? So just go ahead and like raise your hand and keep it up if you're willing to share, because it really is a gift to the circle if you're willing to be vulnerable, and you get more medicine out of it, I believe. Paula Caceres, I'm not sure if I said your last name right. Would you like to unmute and share first? And just keep your hand up for a second so I can make note if you're not Paula. So we'll do Paula, Angela, and Jill first.
Hi, Yaya. Hi,
Hi, it's
everybody.
nice to see you.
Yeah, you too. It's Casares, and that's okay if you didn't get it right. I am here because I am noticing like default, like autopilot type ways of being, of reacting in ways that like don't serve me. And I notice them as like when I'm trying to be like nice and to like make things nice and to make everyone comfortable. And I notice that you're really uncomfortable and you're really dense, but I'm gonna take it on and make it all light and pretty and lovely and like, but I know and I can see and I can sense more and more in the moment, like, oh, that's more like autopilot default, like socialization that really is not helping me or anyone else. And I want to learn how to get out of that, but also like when I'm noticing that and the other way of being would be to not be too nice and too lovely and to make it pretty. There's tension, and I want to know how to like be more like with that tension and discomfort rather than just going into like that default autopilot, which I know is not helpful.
Thank you. And Angela, would you like to unmute and share next?
Hi, everyone. It's my first time here. I actually just saw an email 4 minutes ago, I believe, 5 minutes ago, and it was right after I got an emotional message from somebody who I guess I'm seeing right now. So this is divine timing. I feel like coronavirus has turned the world into one big poly relationship as far as like communication goes. And I am actually dating someone who is poly, and we started dating right as this epidemic started and agreed to be each other's quarantines, as we call it. And yeah, we have very different perspectives on safety, and there's so many layers to this. And I find that for me personally, in communication, I tend to get emotionally flooded, and I find it really difficult to express how I'm feeling, similarly to what Paula said, with calm. And for me, it tends to be more anxiety on the anxious side, and I make it about me, and oh, I'm just uncomfortable, so don't worry about it, when like somebody's actions could be making me uncomfortable. And yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm about to get dumped, because I feel because my standards don't match her standards, and that's really hard. And I feel like everybody's kind of going through a little bit of that right now, whether it's in romantic relationships or friendships. So just figuring out a way to ride the wave, and not let it define who I am, me, my mood, and just being comfortable with my standards. And
Thank you. I just want to acknowledge that if I laugh when you're saying something like, I'm about to get dumped, it's not because I think it's funny or like empathy, but I tend to just laugh at like self honesty and awareness and telling it like we actually see it. That tends to just elicit like a opening, spontaneous response. So just want to clarify what my chuckle there was. Thank you.
so
Excellent. I think we're in the right circle together then. Thank you for sharing. I hear something that sounds like wind, and so just gonna ask everybody to check if they're not speaking, if they're muted, because sometimes if you join on the call later, you might have missed the mute all command. Thank you. Jill, did you still want to share next?
Yes. Hi. Can you hear me okay?
Hi.
Hi. So I shared last time that I'm going through a divorce process with a narcissist, and so I'll have a long time to practice all of these skills. But last time that we met, I really felt like it wasn't possible, but I was going to like hang on to this possibility that we can be peaceful. And actually, the last however long it's been has been really peaceful with little action on my part. So I don't know if it's anything I did or held, but I don't know if I called it into being or if it was just lucky, but it's felt really nice to have that space. And I think it's my non-reactivity. I'll take credit for that. And I feel like I'm so glad this class is the next part of that, because while I have given myself space, I now need to have very real conversations about how to proceed with 3 children and what that's going to look like and what I actually need and feel like is fair. And so, real conversations need to be had. And I really resonated with what Angela said about being emotionally flooded. Is it like, as soon as I start to have it, I get so overwhelmed that I completely shut down. And it's not, partly it's because my partner makes me feel not safe to have those conversations, but also I'm just terrible at them in general. So I'm really excited to see what comes out of this conversation today. So thank you for creating this for us and holding the space. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There's definitely folks who are like, you gotta be positive and don't be so hard on yourself or whatever. But I think I really value humility. And I think it's great when we can say, I'm bad at this. What? I didn't learn it. No one showed it to me. Or maybe they did, but I didn't get it. We all come in with our strengths and weaknesses. And that is definitely why I am here. I am exceedingly bad at this, like to the point where my natural style of communication has uniformly deeply unnerved every single person that I've ever been in an intimate relationship with. So I've had a lifetime to study what it is I'm doing if left to my natural wild self that human psyches dislike, and what I can authentically do on my side of the relationship to make it a little bit easier for other people to understand what it is I'm trying to say. So I think it's totally fine to be bad at these things, and I appreciate your self awareness and humility, because I think it's a great starting place for opening to learn a new skill set. And that is one of the most important things that I have to say about all of this, is that it's not a talent. And it's not a gift. It's not like you either have it or you don't. Like, you might have gifts in that department, but it's a natural capacity that whatever amount of ability you came in with can, and I believe is a good idea to develop. So the idea that relating ethically is a skill set, and it's a teachable, learnable skill set, is like the ground zero that I hope that we all feel confident in. Thank you. If you'd like to share next, raise your hand and keep it up for a minute. So we'll have Olivia, Chiara, and Erica next.
Hi there. So
Hi.
hi. Thank you for holding this space. I've actually been recognizing recently that the closer in relationship that people are to me, the less boundaries that I have, or the more likely I am to bend on those boundaries. And so as I've been recognizing this and going through the process of like re-solidifying those boundaries, it's being met with resistance from the other people. For me, it's actually like familial relationships and friendships that I'm experiencing this in. And so I guess I would love to learn more skills and like getting more comfortable with other people's, like triggering other people or other people's uncomfortability. When I'm told, when I'm reaffirming or I'm telling them that a line has been drawn, and they either don't want to hear that because as humans, I think that we don't really like to be told no that much, or we don't really like to be told that we're crossing people's boundaries. It can be triggering for us. And so that's something that I'm trying to navigate, to like have the sovereignty, right? The firmness that I need, so that my needs, so that my boundaries, right, are holding strong, but doing that in a loving way, to where the other person doesn't feel attacked, right? Or like I'm saying something about them, like as a person, because that's kind of what's being reflected back to me. Or when saying like, they're saying like, oh, I need time to process this, but then they're just completely avoiding ever coming back, and like they're almost just waiting for things to kind of blow over. And in the past, that's, I think, especially with family, right? Like it's so easy to kind of like let that happen. And it's just not working for me anymore. And so I want to find ways to, like, how do you even initiate a hard conversation with someone that doesn't necessarily want to have the conversation? I guess there are a few of the things. Thank you for hearing me.
Thank you so much. There's a lot in there. Do you feel all right about me addressing some of those points specifically in this moment?
Sure.
Just so they don't get missed in everything else, because you're speaking to a lot of things that are really important to the conversation. One is the idea that if you're identifying a relationship as a very intimate relationship, like the closest relationships in your life, there was a time in which it was really working and fulfilling to you, in which that there were things occurring that made it feel good and safe and interesting to take off some of the armor and open and not have boundaries in those places. And that as we live and go through challenges and things, like we can change or other people can change, or things, circumstances can come from the outside and cause us to do things that, you know, damage, or, you know, we can unintentionally or intentionally violate each other. But a lot of relationships kind of end there, especially in these times. It seems like there's like a quickening of reactivity and like speeding towards explosion and never again coming back to the table, that I'm noticing, which is a big part of why I'm like really ramping up this work, because I'm like, this trend cannot continue of just burning through relationships and not stepping into the invitation to maintain or repair relationships that are valuable to us and that have things we value about them, just because it is harder in a way to, it's easier to be all the way open or all the way closed, otherwise known as rigid boundaries. And that's not actually a definition of healthy boundaries. And so the invitation, if we do have boundaries, but they're rigid, is to actually go into that next step of the fluid, which means like we're always in a boundaries negotiation. And I want that to sink in a little bit, because like that, like sacred relating, like any sacred anything, means it takes more attention, it takes more energy, it takes more time. And so a lot of people kind of bail when they realize like how present you need to be to always be in a negotiation. And then I just want to acknowledge that it is just psychological, considered like theory, and well understood, that in a relationship where the boundaries have lapsed and it's becoming unhealthy, if one person develops boundaries, the other person will usually feel abandoned. And so just saying that that's kind of a meta thing that we know about boundaries work, to hopefully create a little bit of compassion perhaps for the fact that you and this friend or family member were in the same place of unboundariedness, and then you decided to get healthy, and it, in a way, you did abandon them in that level of codependence or enmeshment. And just to have some compassion for whatever they might go through, and know that it will take time, and if the relationship is valuable to you, a fair amount of patience and holding space for them to go through their feelings, to see that you're still right there, and that there is a relationship on the other side of this new boundary. Thank you. Chiara, would you still like to share next?
Hello, yes. My name is
Hello.
Kiara, or Kiki.
Kiara.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm calling from Australia, from the east coast of Australia, north coast, and from Mullumbimby Creek. So it's actually dawn here, which feels really nice to share, and bring in that energy of the dawn. I've got the roosters crowing, and the whole day is kind of beginning. So yeah, what you just shared, Erin, was really resonant for me. And I've found that in my earlier 20s, I'd either go from, I'm kind of at my later 20s now, I'd either go from really wanting to have these like epic relational times with people, and not being met in that. So then I'd just go like, okay, bye. And bail and just completely cut the connection. And I got into a really big habit of that, where I just leave like friend groups and social spheres, and have kind of like ended up in a place now where I'm like quite a solitary person, and I'm okay with that. And I have like been working on just some specific, really resonant relationships with people, where I've been doing this kind of work, which has given me a sense of like, I'm not completely alone, and I'm not completely like fucked up and judgmental. And yeah, so now I'm kind of like in a more building phase. Like I feel like I'm coming into more of an extrovert expression of who I am, and also, you know, have been journeying within community for a little while, and wanting to expand my horizons and my abilities in holding space for like my own relationships, but holding space for other people's relationships, and maybe like helping to facilitate connection within the wider community, which in Australia at the moment in this town is there's quite a divide between the hippies and the straight people, and by straight, sorry, I mean maybe more mainstream, or just kind of, yeah, mainstream. I'll just leave it at that. So yeah, I feel like there's lots coming for me, and yeah, I'm just really excited to be here. So thank you so much for sharing all of this, and yeah, it's really nice to be a part of this group.
Thank you so much for bringing your new day, new beginnings energy to our circle. Erica, would you still like to share next?
Sure, yes, thank you. Hi, everyone. Wow, it's really lovely to be in Circle, and it's lovely to meet you virtually, Yaya. Everything you say resonates with me so much. It's just so, yes. I also had the experience of, being the sort of like goth, punk kid, all the phases, all the sort of subculture things I really relate to. So that's always sweet when we can relate on those levels. But likewise, in my communication style, I can be very strange. I can be very intense. My energy centers are, pretty big. And sometimes when I share myself in my full authenticity, I feel like I really rub people the wrong way, or, or I catalyze people maybe in ways that I'm not even aware of or unconscious of, or so I'm really trying to be more mindful around what I bring with my words, the energy that I share in the moment. And it's really hard. It's really hard work. And I'm in this place where I've done, a lot of inner work and a lot of integration, and I've reached, this wholeness has come online for me in a way that has been so profound and so present. And I'm able to like now just now start to like embody that wholeness and embody my higher self and bring all of that in. And it's still in the relating and in the dancing with others that I find, it just kind of like disconnects me even from myself in the relating. So I'm just trying to like be really present with myself while communicating and having those channels open with others. And then of course, things like communicating on Zoom makes it even more strange because of eye contact and all these other things. So it's just an interesting time to be working through all of this. And I really appreciate you holding this space and sharing so much of your trials and errors and insights and epiphanies and all of it. So thank you.
Thank you. I am just now in the last couple days really having a personal understanding of how the timing of this class and the personal challenges in my life relate to Venus retrograde. So I want to mention that right now when you're saying, all these new and different and disrupted ways of communicating, that definitely feels like part of Venus retrograde, is that our normal channels are disrupted. And so we have to look at other ways, and those ways may or may not be working. And it's the way that disruption, it can be neutral and it can be destructive, but it also can create the space for something new and break up our habits and patterns around these things. So just calling in and acknowledging our sister Venus in our process, and say I think it's a great time to be doing this work of sacred pause, ideally on our relationships and their trajectories, to evaluate what has been and specifically evaluate our role in co-creating the challenges that we are currently in the midst of, to take some responsibility for some of our habits, our patterns, our karmas that we brought to the table, then, and what we can take responsibility for improving that for the good of ourselves, but and the whole relationship. So when we change, suddenly the whole terrain might change, maybe. Thank you. I had seen another hand, I think, Eleni. Did you still want to share next, Eleni?
I would love to.
Awesome. Thank you.
So hi, my name is Eleni. I'm calling from Pennsylvania. I thought I would share a little bit about why I came, in case maybe the sentiments resonated. I came home from college maybe 2 weeks ago to find many things having changed in my family dynamic. One of which being that a sibling of mine is struggling with addiction. And it was something that just kind of blindsided everybody. We didn't realize how bad it was. My parents were kind of hiding how bad it was, trying not to stress me out while I was away. Having to come home and really be thrown into everything full force. And it really resonated with me what Olivia said about boundaries, because this whole process is just really testing me as trying to understand what my role in the life of my family member is, how to help him through this time, but also to be my own support and recognize when I'm burnt out.
Thank you. So just kind of acknowledging that although we definitely have a role and responsibility, and what we bring to the table has a lot to do with what comes, there are also things that happen that are outside of our control, like other people in our blood family having severe challenges that will make it harder for us to maintain a healthy relationship with them. And so I tend to lean pretty hard on the other side of things, of like, you know, taking full responsibility for what is arising. But I'm grateful to have your example be brought to the table of that's not quite the same set of practices when what you're desiring to do is it's kind of a mystery what you're, if like it, to me, like if I'm really honest, it's like a mystery what our role might be when the relationship is, they are your family, and there is something unwell, and you can't just fix it or end it. And you likely wouldn't want to just end it without really trying to whatever it is that felt aligned. So thank you for speaking to that perspective.
Thank you.
We'll take a couple more shares. You're welcome. If you want to raise your hand and keep it up if you feel called to share next. Yemaya, Moss, and Willow.
Hello, I'm calling from the UK, so it's we're at the end of the day here. It's really dusky. I think with me, I co-parent 2 children with my ex, and I can't get it right with communicating with him. You know, I'm quite blunt with him, and I hurt his feelings often. But then when I'm not authentically saying what I need or what my opinion is about some parenting thing, then I spent hours afterwards thinking, oh, I should have said this, should have said that. And it just drives me crazy. And I feel like I just can't get it right with him. So I just feel like I need lots of sort of help with just basic communication.
Mm-hmm. Well, blessings to you and anybody who is in a co-parenting relationship, and that's like a main draw to improve the communication, because we can acknowledge that most likely if there was not children, you would just determine that you and this person are not that compatible and that it's not a very enjoyable relationship and you don't have to have it. So when kids are a part of that and we can assess, yes, I wouldn't be friends with this person even if not for children, but there are children. And so now what is the invitation? It's it feels like it's a hot seat in terms of like you're really gonna grow up. Like not everybody has to grow up in this life apparently, and not everybody like does the work or wants to. And but in that situation where you really love your kids and you want to be a good parent and create something from your family, the dynamic you're describing feels like an accelerated maturation process that you've held yourself accountable to. So I just bow to you and the inner strength that you are cultivating. Moss, would you like to share next?
Hi, yes, greetings everyone. I hope that I managed to express what it is that I want to. I'm surprised how vulnerable it feels. So I think I just started to bleed today, and I notice a pattern that repeats itself again and again, which is as this moon time is a kind of truth serum, there are challenges that I have experienced throughout the month that only start to feel challenging at this time. And I think I'm wondering how to hold the passion and the burning worth of these topics in myself, so that I can bring them into conversation at a time when I am somehow more stable and more calm, because I don't feel able to communicate in an effective way during this time, most of the time. And especially in my primary romantic relationship, I think it is very necessary for me to gain this skill, so that I'm not like once a month just shitting all over everything, but still holding these topics respectfully so that they can be addressed when the time is right. Yeah, I hope that came across.
I think so. Are you open to me sharing a little bit of my experience with that?
Yes, please.
So I'm definitely a person who, I was married for I don't know how long, more than 10 years. The transition was so long, I forget what was what. But in that marriage, I more or less was pretty happy for most of the first half of it, except the week before my period, in which it was his presence was like nails on a chalkboard to me, and everything he did and said drove me like completely insane. And so I would just tell myself, like, whatever you do, don't make any decisions during this time. Just like pressure cooker, like if you can, and then it'll pass. And then as I got older and I started to go into perimenopause, it took longer and longer to pass. And to now that I'm like really solidly in perimenopause, it doesn't pass. Like that's me. That's the me in there, is that thing that comes up and is like, no, 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 no. And whatever I thought was me was the conditioning. And I'm not saying that's the case for you. And I'm not saying that you should like try to talk about it when you're in the moment, like when you're in the hormones, like it's a medicine ceremony to me. And definitely like don't try to have really consequential conversations at like peak sensitivity medicine or menstruation. In my opinion, it's not the best time, because it could go either way. It could go really great or really awful. But to me, making it a practice of like whatever it was that would come up through the like period goggles, to that I would write it down, and I would think about it later when I felt completely calm and untriggered, and look at like, what was the value that wasn't being met, or what was the need that wasn't being met that I got so upset about. So the amount of upset doesn't necessarily matter. Like if you got a little upset or a lot upset, it can still be pointing to a very small boundaries transgression and a need to know your value for yourself first, and then to maybe to articulate the boundary and the value to the other person, and make requests when you're feeling totally calm and able to do that. And like kind of however long it takes to unpack it a little bit and become less triggered. That's the invitation for me, being a person who has taken temperance as my teacher, coming from a person who vacillated between extremes and was sort of like made drama, that I know that that's my nature, to be big and uncomfortable, and that there's something in the waiting and the cooking and refining what happened, and communicating about it when I'm in a temperate place, that has been really beautiful for me, and hope might be useful or interesting for you. Thank you. And we'll have Willow share, and then we'll just kind of, that'll be that. So, if there's something coming up for you, you can put it in the chat, and we can get to it later. And you might find it answered in or spoken to in the next part. So Willow, did you still want to share?
Hi.
Hi.
So when I was here last month, I shared that I was like coming to the conscious uncoupling thing for like the preventative medicine, and since then my relationship has transitioned out of, and we're not in a romantic relationship anymore. And I first just kind of want to like speak that into the circle, because I feel like I was maybe a little misleading last time, and what I was saying was a very legitimate thing, but it also, like, I think lying to myself a little bit at that point in our relationship transition. So I wanted to be open about that. And now, and just like over the past month, I've been kind of thrown into this really fabulous, almost like psychedelic experience of knowing nothing. And I don't know if it's like Saturn return shit or what, but I'm like, I don't know what's happening with my business in a month. I don't know what's happening with my relationship. I don't know what's happening with where I live. Like everything is unknown, and I am loving it. I'm like constantly learning. So it's the best. And I would say I'm normally a pretty decent communicator when it comes to like logical things that I can explain and like put into a spreadsheet and legalese. And this, I can't do that with, and I have no idea how to communicate it. And I've had like some really difficult conversations with my family, and like, and I want to say like, oh, he and I broke up because I'm gay. But like, that's such just like a tiny little part of what's happening that it feels like a lie. And I just, so any tools for communicating when like you don't have a lot of clarity and are okay with that and aren't like looking for clarity, just like communicating a complicated, unknowable experience.
Thank you so much. I'd like to see just a show of hands, like raise your hand and keep it up, if like the more that you kind of go down the path of authenticity and communication, being yourself in relationships, the more you feel like if you try to explain your position to other people in a way that they will understand, it feels like a real lie and dishonoring of your reality. Oh, geez. I mean, I'm only on the first screen and I see like every hand is up. Yeah. Yeah. That's really telling to me. I'd like to just, for us all to just take a breath with that reality that there is an inherent limitation at this time in this culture on this planet in the language, the verbal spoken language that we were handed. Um, it's really profound to me confirmation sometimes of why is this so hard? Just to be yourself, they tell you in like kindergarten. You know, they're telling a 5-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old to be yourself when we're like, you know, 20, 30, 40, and we still feel completely terrified or just unable to, well, being ourself, we can do nothing but to then relate with anyone else as ourself. It's hard. And I think that it's not, I've been saying a lot this week, like, these tools don't make your life easier. I'm sorry. They've made my life better, and by better I mean more satisfying and meaningful and worth living. But they if I'm honest, I think they like make it harder sometimes, because I do have a desire and some level commitment to try to say what I actually mean. And in the last couple years, you know, that's been great in terms of attracting people from all over the world who speak that language and they want to take the time and be a little more specific and say things in a different way that's closer. But pretty frequently in my day-to-day life, I have people just laugh at me and be like, what are you even saying? Like, who talks that way? When I feel really proud that I took the time to choose my words and I feel I really got it right. I really said what I wanted to say and communicated something of the essence of myself that, you know, we're all just like, what the heck is that? Just like, well, that's an authentic communication straight from the void. You're welcome. But I get that that's not something you're interested in, and we probably will not have that much fun communicating and shouldn't be close. Yeah. So I liked your bringing in the language of psychedelic unknowing, and that you could have your whole business and relationship in total upheaval and be loving it and think it's the greatest thing ever. It it needs to be spoken to that that's also possible. Thank you. All right. So there's, I know much more in the space, in the room. I'm kind of going to put out an energetic call to just psychically communicate it to each other through body language, to me energetically, and to trust that there is a multi-dimensional triage process that's mysterious and but that I know very well and trust very much in terms of what gets said today is the things that are the most important for the greatest number of people present to hear, and that what doesn't get said will get said next time or the time after that. So one thing I want to mention on the housekeeping side at this point in the journey is admin's actually not my strong suit, and it's pretty hard for me to be detailed. So I'm pretty sure that I did not post an end time for this circle, which is not something that I normally do. So we're going to, the idea is that it would be between 1.5 and 2 hours, depending on how many people showed up and were interested in sharing and how juicy or deep the conversation goes. But that will definitely end by 2:30, if not 2:15. So just so if anybody was wondering about that and thought that was a little odd, you were right. And The next thing I'll invite us to do is in the vein of the sacred pause. So if you did have the opportunity to get some water at the beginning, you can drink a little bit of it now. The idea being we're in the terrain of Venus, we're in the terrain of emotions and the heart. My experience is that on a certain level, the heart and the womb space are the same space. So the heart space, the womb space, they're very watery places, and they're also very receptive places. So when we come together and we share, we may or may not have had opportunity to experience that. We really do kind of become one organism. So for example, there's somebody in the upper left-hand corner of my screen where a door opened behind her, and I felt as if my door in my space opened, and I felt like my nervous system surprised and like, oh, who's in my space? So those are just little indications that our boundaries come down naturally when we hear things that we resonate with, and when we feel safe enough to share ourselves, and when we share ourselves and we feel received. So the purpose of and intention of drinking some water right now is to keep things flowing and moving, because we are going to feel what one another are feeling to some degree, to the degree that we're willing, and it's helpful. It creates empathy and compassion and allows us to learn from other people's direct experiences more as if they were our own. But we also want to acknowledge that sometimes we're porous or receptive in a way that things get lodged or stuck, and we don't need that. So we're going to work with water throughout the call today, and then have some exercises after we get off the call to just make sure that things are flowing through us and we're only hanging on to what is dharmic and enhancing, and we're letting go of everything else. On that same note, if you need to go to the bathroom, I invite you to do so, just remembering that we have a recording. If you feel like missing a few moments would be sad, and I'm going to try to hold myself accountable to that also, just because we don't need any extra energy of holding the flow in this ritual space. And that is just a very practical way that we can align with that, is that to heed the call to release as it comes in the appropriate ways, in the appropriate spaces. All right. So the next round of this space is short, but where I will just be sharing a few things that you could call them tools or practices in a way, but what they really are premises or precepts, which basically means that nothing that I'm going to say or anybody that might share on these topics is going to be helpful if we're not in agreement about a few things. And by agreement, I mean that if we don't share certain values. And so if I say some of these things and you don't believe that they're essential to right relationship, just write it down and think about it. And like, if the outcome of that is that you're like, well, yeah, I'm not in total accord with what that lady was saying, that's cool. But the tools that we'll share will be most helpful to people who have not just a value, but who have kind of identified it as a really important value around communication at all, around relationship at all, but within communication and relationship, that it's helpful if you value compassion, honesty, and the idea that all life is sacred, and that it's important for us to do things in a way that respects the validity of all life. So another one of these kind of precepts or premises is that becoming responsible for our experience is a journey that we will have to take. And a lot of times people are like, yeah, self-responsibility, right, cool. Like, it sounds good. But when it comes down to the moment, it's really hard sometimes to actually embody self-responsibility, meaning to not blame another person ever. That blame actually is being removed from our, we're a lot of times we have given ourselves permission at some point to blame other people, especially if it's like, well, if the thing they did was really, really offensive to me or really painful to me, then it's okay for me to blame them. And we don't say this to ourselves usually, but it's what our behavior says. So a really wonderful mantra from my therapist is, blame is the lie that I didn't co-create the situation. So it's saying that this situation is it's happening to me, it's happening in a vacuum, and I didn't bring anything to the table at all that triggered or stimulated or created or invited this behavior or situation. Nothing that I did had any bearing on this outcome. It's them, and they brought this. And so, like I said, it's kind of easy to accept, yeah, being honest, communication, compassion, these are great things. But so if you're with me, that those are things that you feel matter, and that maybe you even look for in a relationship or another person as qualities to be attracted to, then what comes next is an acceptance of the idea that it might not be enough to value these things or look for other people who also value them. This happens a lot with intentional communities where there's an intention, like we really intend to communicate. We all value communication, but there's no time set up to communicate. And there's no shared vocabulary around what the certain words mean. And there's no process, like a determined who will moderate this conversation. What will happen if we disagree on core values? So this idea that the values might not be enough, that we may need to make vows or internal commitments to ourselves and build structures in our lives and relationships that hold ourselves accountable to activities that develop the capacity to embody the values. And so if like that sounds like gibberish to you, like, it's okay. It might resonate with you later down the road, or it might resonate with you now. But it's like a step that someone who's like, I'm in my late 30s, there's a lot of people who are like pretty good at something in my community. You know, they really have some medicine around something, and they have similar and shared values, but there's just not time often, or energy, or resources to make spaces and structures to put in place that will actually facilitate us embodying the things that the shared values. So I believe that we need to do that for ourselves before we expect another person to do that in a one-to-one relationship, or a whole community to do that together. If we can't set up things within our life that that give us opportunities to practice, to identify the things that are hard for us, and practice strengthening and developing them. And so that often looks like being realistic, like rather than idealistic, and having this like broad picture of what it would feel like, or like a vibration of love or healthy relationship, and getting really specific around like one pattern that keeps coming up, or one piece of feedback that we keep getting from people. Or for example, during coronavirus, the added stress in my life and relationships being exponential to the stress I was experiencing previous to the virus, it brought to the surface that I have not fully embodied the value of only speaking from my realm of empowerment, meaning if like the situation, I'm like, this is horrible and unsafe and you're being terrible to me, saying, I feel really unsafe right now. Because that's the only thing I know is true, is that I feel that way. So I'm not putting any blame on anyone else. That's something I really believe in, and I've seen like do wonders for my relationships. But during coronavirus with the extra stress, it's like I didn't even recognize who I was talking, like who was talking. Every day, every person I was talking to, I was going, you need this to do this, and you need to do this, and I need you to this, and I need you to that. And like, it was like uncontrollable. I felt possessed. And so then I was able to identify and write down, under pressure, I have difficulty maintaining my self-responsible language and making I statements. And so I need to really move this to the top of my mindfulness practice and make little flashcards or write it on my mirror or share with people that I'm relating with to have some accountability. I'm having a lot of trouble making I statements this week. So if you notice and it feels bad to you that I'm saying you need to this and you need to that, I give you permission to gently remind me that I didn't want to be doing that. So I don't believe in holding others accountable unless we've specifically asked them to hold us accountable to something. But in the realm of communication, I will identify things and then I will confess them, my challenges, to people that I'm close with, and invite them to gently hold me accountable when it matters enough and I'm not getting there on my own through my own mindfulness. And then yeah, that's kind of it for things that are just like precepts, where if the stuff that I just said sounds like, oh, fuck no, it's okay. You know, you could read a book about boundaries next instead, you know, and just chew on what I said. Um, we got to go through these things at the pace that is interesting and possible and safe for us. And I say that because a lot of times we will assign a book called Facing Codependence, which really deconstructs a lot of our common unhealthy patterns in relationship. And when we do groups with this book, a lot of times people will say that the minute that they saw the cover of the book, they felt like they were going to throw up, and they ordered the book right away. And then they like stared at it in the corner of their meditation space for like a year before they could even open it, because they knew that it was going to be really confronting and transformational. So I'm just acknowledging that like maybe what I'm saying is like boring because you already know it all, but maybe I'm saying something that you're just like, no, but that really wasn't my fault. That was really their fault. And that happens sometimes. We dig our heels in as we get closer to transforming some of our dynamics. And so I just want to open it up for like 1 or 2 minutes if anybody has a like question or an aha or a what about right now before we move on to some practical things that we can do or try. Courtney?
Hi. So for me, one thing that helps in my relationship with my partner is, we actually got this from some of our friends, is that we try and have like a weekly meeting, not only where we just talk about stuff that needs to happen, but we also check in with each other to see where we're at emotionally and what's going on like with that week. So that way we can kind of check in with ourselves first, and then we check in with each other. And that has been amazing in our communication skills, because that way we have to check in with our own selves and we have to hold ourselves accountable. And then if we are struggling with something that week, we can go ahead and tell that person in that time. So what you said about having that set time to actually have a conversation about communication has been extremely important. We've probably been doing that for like 2 years. And if it doesn't happen every week, it usually happens every other week. And so that way, if there's something I'm struggling with, I can write it down, like you said, and then I can come back to it at a different time when there is a set time to actually talk about it. And it's amazing. Like, I feel like it's something that everyone should do. And I feel like it's something that we should have been doing for a really long time. So I totally agree with you about setting, like checking in with yourself and then holding yourself accountable and then being able to hold the other person accountable too. And because if you don't have a set time to talk about stuff, then nothing gets talked about. And that's when things come up. And that's when aggression happens. And that's when feelings get hurt. And then trying to deconstruct that and build it back up sucks, and it's really hard. So just trying to be aware of that, like, I'm feeling this way, how are you feeling? And then that it's great. So I totally agree with you. That's it.
Thank you so much. That's a really good point, and one that I really believe in, and I'm guessing that other people can resonate with this idea or may have arrived at some kind of a similar practice intuitively, because I remember, like, I was somebody who would have a lot of like non-sexual marriages under the banner of like best friends growing up. And so those were some of like my first opportunities to just like be in really deep spaces with no tools and see like how wildly things can degenerate and painfully. And I remember several of those kinds of relationships in a row in my 20s where, you know, we started to break up or we started to move out or end the thing. It was blowing up so much. And we broke through in a confrontation to a space of empathy and understanding of, oh, I had no idea that bothered you so much, or something like, wow. And that those conversations would always end in, you know, we should really do this more often. Why don't we do this more often? Well, because if I say we need to talk, you get super triggered. And so there's this way in which if you wait until there's any kind of problem or dynamic brewing to try to invite the other person into a more intimate conversation when they're already feeling guarded or in a story, it feels exponentially terrifying. And so I don't actually, it's not as if I think it won't work. Like, we always have opportunities to reboot or start over or repair or change an existing relationship. Like, we can evolve within relationship, but it's definitely easier if you're if you can, from the beginning, say, hey, we're dating, it's fun, wow, the sex is great, I kind of want to do this. Do you want to do this too? Well, I would be interested if we could, say, for example, have a monthly meeting or a weekly meeting to make sure that we're staying on the same page. Or, you know, when everything's all flowing and gooey and you're yes, to say, hey, I actually like require this if you want to go deeper. So, you know, what's up now? And make some criteria for getting involved in a more committed relationship that says, like, I have no interest in becoming trapped or enmeshed in or committing to a relationship where there isn't a space set aside to show up and communicate about our emotions, and where we haven't made some agreements around what kinds of tools and communications are appropriate in that space and which ones aren't. So yes, I believe that is a really great space to create in which your tools that you're learning from books or circles like this can be practiced. So it is a way of bringing like some sacred practice into the relating. Thank you.
Thank you.
Was there another hand I thought I saw on the last call for any like ahas or what or questions? Did I see your hand, Amber, or no? Yeah. Can you unmute?
There we go. Hi. Hi.
Thank you.
Well, sort of something that slipped into my head as you were speaking upon coming from I statements and taking full responsibility, also to as you said, your therapist said about like blame, right? Like you still had a part to take in it. But I thought about childhood and youth and then sort of like all those things. So it's like when you're thinking back on your childhood and a situation that maybe happened within your family dynamic, and now we're an adult, and creating language to bridge that adult and child without blame seems sort of impossible. So I don't know, that was just like a thought. I don't have really a question, just that's what popped into my head at the time.
Thank you. I think it's a great thought because what you're doing is pointing out a dynamic that is in the space, even if you don't have a specific question or answer. And I think it is an important dynamic to address that I did not have in my notes to talk about today, which is to say, when it comes to, what do I call it? Baseline, ethical, healthy relating for everyone, every adult who's in an at-will relationship. The invitation, I believe, is actually the growth step. Like there's no bridge between what we're born into and what was role modeled and 100% responsibility. Like it doesn't work. You can't go from 0 to fully grown effective adult. And so the growth step for most people is to make a practice of taking 50% responsibility for adult to adult interactions. Meaning that if someone is like, I'm trying to think of a real example from my life because like hypotheticals get weird. People are like, is she talking about me? So I want to be sure I'm talking about a real thing in my life. Okay, I'm going to be super vulnerable here because it's the example that came, but it's like, you know, really vulnerable for me. In our year-long apprenticeship, the most difficult job in the whole space is not my job. It's the person who runs the kitchen. And if you've ever worked in a kitchen that's not like a Top Chef competitive ego kitchen, but like a real here to feed the people or ceremonial kitchen, it is a job that really grinds your ego down and requires like profound humility and desire to feed the people above all else, and that your reward is the smiles on the faces of the people eating the food. But usually the meals are not the main thing that people are there for. There's something else that is the reason they're there. And then they need to be fed while they're there. So there's something in that dynamic that I repeatedly hear from the cooks when it's time. I say, you know, what can I do for you? Or how are you happy in this job? Where is this relationship not working for you? It tends to come down to like, I don't feel as if you really understand how hard this job is and like really acknowledged. And I hear it a lot, and I really try, and I try to ask, well, what are some specific things I can do that you can identify that would you think would make you feel more seen? Because I do believe that I cherish this contribution. So if I'm not expressing that effectively, and so, you know, the third time in 3 years that I heard this feedback in my business, I went a little deeper than just putting it back on them and saying, well, what would you like me to do? And I'll do that. And saying, how can I take 50% responsibility for the way that this is going down? And I had to ask for a minute and say, well, let me like breathe into this and see if there's anything else, if there's any wounded part of me or unconscious possibility that I might be coming from that might be unconsciously vibing into the environment and creating this. And I was able to identify that because I actually think that the nourishment is the most important thing, that there's a part of me that feels like people love the cook more and they remember the cook more. And I spent my entire life building this program and it's everything I have. And the cook is generally somebody who gets paid to make the food and serve it during the weekends with love and with magical intentions, but they can walk away at any time. And so I was able to just admit, you know, like a part of me is just jealous that everyone likes you more. You know, I have to like be like, you know, give homework assignments and stuff. And so that might be affecting this somehow. And I invite you to look to track that with me. So that's an example where I don't necessarily know that that is what's occurring or that is what's creating what they're experiencing, but I can acknowledge that I might have some stuff going on in here that might be contributing to their perception. I'm not just saying holding space and saying that's all you, honey, but I'm here for you. So the taking 50% responsibility, I do that in all of my intimate relationships. I am rarely met by the other person in that, meaning that if I'm upset with them, they rarely take 50% responsibility for upsetting me. And I have to just accept that this is my precept, this is my belief, my value, my practice, and I'm gonna do it, whether or not the other person even gets what I'm doing or appreciates it or decides to reciprocate or learns from it. That I can't be doing that with any of those intentions, or that'll be felt as condescending, like I'm going to teach you something about relationship right now. So then to go on to the 100% self-responsibility, that is the initiate's path. So to be a grown-up and a human and an ethical relator, you have to take 50% responsibility in my paradigm. But to be a medicine person, to be a healer, to be someone who brings evolutionary outcomes about on a regular basis, you take 100% responsibility. And that gets very, very sticky when it comes to situations of abuse, addiction, sexual violation. That's a really deep, tall order to get to the level of what the karmas are that generated that. So I'm definitely not that person that's saying that if you got raped, it's your fault. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying that there are people who decide to, and especially people that I work with around sexual trauma, who decide based on their own values that they would like to take 100% responsibility for everything they have experienced in this embodiment, and that they are choosing to dig down into ancestral karmas and past life stuff and look for where was the opportunity for me to be in a different body, country, family. How far back was that? And why might I have made this choice instead of that choice, knowing on the soul level what might come with that choice? So it might be getting too esoteric right now. I'm going to stop myself. But I want to say that because that question of what about with kids, that really mostly comes up in situations of abuse, addiction, violation, is that I'm like, it's a choice and it's a powerful choice to take 100% responsibility, but I'm not saying everybody has to take it in order to be happy or healthy. And I'm not suggesting that children need to take 100% or even 50% responsibility for what occurs to them. Like, none of the rules of codependence or boundaries to me apply to interacting with dependent minors, because they don't have a choice. You know, a 6-year-old can't emancipate themselves from you if you're being abusive to them. Or if they were able to, that would be like a crazy thing where they had to like tell the neighbors and call child protective services on their own parents and whatever. Like, it's not a child's responsibility to take responsibility for these are tools and precepts and concepts for adults, and it might apply to a relationship with an adult child who is who has the ability to move out or drive away or excommunicate you. Yeah, so maybe that was probably more than what you wanted, but I would like to just kind of hear, like, was that interesting and helpful in the terrain of your question, or was it just kind of like, well, that was a portal?
No, yeah, I mean, what I kind of taking away from that is moving forward now as an adult, like I can bring my 50-50, right? not to say like everything in the past is a wash, but I'm only I can really hold responsibility for myself moving forward, and holding myself accountable. So yeah, no, thank you.
You're welcome. I think like some basic things about our language too, of just being able to say like, as a child, I felt very emotionally overwhelmed by my mom, but as an adult, I recognize that actually I just don't have, there's not a lot of basis for regular relating. So I'm not avoiding her out of fear of being emotionally overwhelmed. I just understand that her communication skill set is more fixed and is not in a growth place, and so that limits what's possible for us in the realm of intimacy. So just kind of saying then and now can help like our psyche to process and understand what is the right boundaried steps or actions or words now.
Thank
you. Right. So in this next round, I'm going to talk about what I call precursors to effective communication. And so the reason that that's even like a whole body of knowledge is because of what Courtney shared, just that we believe that there has to be a space that's comfortable and not threatening to have the communications. And then what we really believe is that there's a fair amount of work, inner work, that we can do on our own in advance before we step into that space, that makes it much more likely that what happens in that space will bring about the outcome that we are most wanting and needing. So the subtitle of this little collection of steps is, whenever possible, look before you leap. Meaning, you know, if we feel triggered, or we feel just not even necessarily triggered, but just like something is really arising in us, something is really emergent and calling for our attention, it's a best practice to, if we're able to say, just because this feels really big for me right now is not necessarily an indication that this conversation can or needs to occur right now. And that, in fact, I find that it's always better for me and my process to never have the conversation when I feel obsessively urgent that we have to talk right now, to take that as an indication that I'm activated in a way that is going to be oversensitized and reactive. And so to I would even say avoid. And a lot of people have a huge problem with this one, because they're like, I want to be more authentic, I want to speak up, I don't want to suppress things. But in reality, when we dig a little deeper, we find that often what's actually happening is this feels so uncomfortable in my nervous system. And I know that if I could just blah it all out now, regardless of what that does to the relationship or feels like to the other person, I will feel better in the immediate and get a better night's sleep, and I have to work tomorrow, or, you know, I just can't handle how this feels. So there, you know, there's like I haven't found the better word for this, and I apologize, but there's very third dimensional words for this, like, you know, emotionally vomiting. That's kind of something that we will blame. It's a blame language, but it's like, oh, that person just called me. It's like, I have to talk to you right now. And I love them and I care about them. So I said, okay. And then they just unloaded on me for the next hour, like right before my big meeting or whatever. This quality that has been normalized and we see a lot of feeling like I need to feel better. So I'm going to put this all in your space in a completely like undigestible way, with no regard for where you're at in that moment. Maybe you just heard that your dad is going into the hospital like 5 minutes before, and then, like, you know, somebody's like I'm going to tell you all the ways that I'm not happy in this relationship. So there are a number of steps that we feel. And a lot of our practices have a sort of unconscious roots in Buddhism, because that was a part of our, like a deep part of our first spiritual explorations when we were 20 in New York. So I really do love the teacher Thich Nhat Hanh. And what one of his books about anger and relationships was, he just had this practice that he called something like make an appointment for Saturday. And it's really geared toward people working 9 to 5, 40-hour-a-week jobs, Monday through Friday, who are living together and things building up during the week. And then it's Friday and it's the first time you have a chance to talk and kind of like barfing on each other, or during the week when you're busy and under-resourced. And so it just, this kind of draws from that, is like, make an appointment for Saturday or next week or whenever it is that you can look at your calendar and say, I'm rested, I'm fed, I'm centered, and I'm actually available to be present for another person. So the first thing in this precursors to effective communication is choose or recommit to a mindfulness practice, because Thich Nhat Hanh was a mindfulness teacher, and all of those teachings came from the mindfulness practices that he taught. And it's just reactivity is the enemy of all evolutionary conversations, and mindfulness is one of the most practices, or some of the most powerful tools we have to address our inherent reactivity. And so we need practices, be they food, dietary, body work, psychotherapy, meditation, medicine practice, that actively soothe and stabilize the nervous system, and that we need to be doing those regularly, because, you know, life happens, so we don't ever know. And if we're just waiting to get triggered and then we're trying to use those practices after the fact to calm down, we don't have like a robust water table built up already. So having, it really does not matter to me, like mindfulness practices that, like, there's one for my kid that's like, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, or whatever, but it really works. So it doesn't have to be like super spiritual. But things around breathing and presence, it can be brushing your teeth with like a lot of mindfulness, but just like being present to your body sensations, your breath, learning to notice when your breath is quickening or your chest is tightening, or there's a weird sensation in the middle of your belly, like a rock or a spasm. Like, what are the ways that your body tells you, I am triggered? Because the body sensations always precede the mental awareness, I am triggered right now. So once we have a mindfulness practice, I'm inviting you to make a conscious choice that says, for the next 10 days or 20 days, some really time-bound, manageable period of time, I am going to choose to use all triggers as an invitation to practice. So what that means is that a part of us, if someone is saying something that we don't like, a part of us can say, this is great. This is a great opportunity for me to get to know myself better and understand and practice articulating my boundaries in a respectful way. I'm stoked. Here I go. I'm going to go in my room and do the practice. And so what happens next, ideally, with this paying attention to the body, maybe your hands get cold, maybe you get sweaty, maybe your armpits start smelling like battery acid. These are all like common signs. To actually make sure it's getting all the way to the point of consciousness of saying, I'm triggered right now. Some really strange conversations happen when somebody's like, eyes are getting black and their chest is puffing up and their voice is raising and they're saying, I'm not triggered, I'm not triggered. But this happens. And so we can't just point the finger at other people and say, gosh, that person's so unconscious. They don't even know that they're like purple in the face. They're obviously triggered. The only thing that we can do is just say, well, how many times a week do I acknowledge that really triggered me? I'm triggered in this conversation. And when we become triggered in that conversation, take a moment to own the fact that you are no longer yourself. You are going into fight or flight or freeze mode. Your nervous system is taking over. Your primal animal body is taking over. And you are going to lose access to your tools. In the same way that if your tools were in a little fanny pack around your waist and you're in the woods and you're hunting and you're getting attacked by a bear and you're pulling out your bow and arrow from your weapons, you don't have any hands to reach for your tools. So if you're a fighter and you've gone into fight mode, you cannot access your tools. And if you are freezing, I'm a freeze person. So when I freeze, it's dangerous because I often keep performing engagement on the surface and for a while. And if that's in a date or a sexual situation, like, it can be really hard. So again, I try to tell people that I'm relating with right away. When I'm triggered, I become nonverbal and I lose access to my yes and no. And so we're going to go very slow and build a lot of trust in certain areas so that I don't unintentionally go farther than I want to go because I've frozen and I'm going to seem to you, for all intents and purposes, like a yes or like somebody who's engaged in participating. And so once we can acknowledge, oh, I'm triggered. So as much as I desperately want an outcome of this situation right now, or I think we could come to closure, I know my highest self knows I'm not myself. This probably isn't going to go the way that I want it to. So if it's if it's an asynchronous communication, like a text message or an email, you're good because you can take all the time that you need, or say, I need a minute to respond, or I need till next week to respond, and take the time we need to go through a effective inner process. But if you're in real time and if you live with the person, or if it's a person in your workplace that you can't necessarily just not deal with it right now, then we need to set up some practices and some norms around saying, like, I'm triggered right now. I'm not really sure what it's about. And I like some language that I really like in intimate relationship or in like a coven situation, like intimate circle work, is just to say, I actually can't tell if I'm a yes or no to this, or I'm triggered and I don't feel I don't really understand why, so I need a moment to know my heart. And then I'm not forcing myself to try to articulate in the moment, but I'm also not leaving the other person hanging in a really unsafe way. Like if you're in the middle of a conversation and you're like sharing about your day or a dream you had, and someone gets up in the middle of that conversation, it's like, I gotta go. Like, to me, that's terrifying. That's like, what's going on? Did I say something? Are you gonna have diarrhea? Like, can you just tell me like what's happening so that I'm not sitting here like freaking out for the next like undisclosed period of time about the state of things. So just being able to say like, I'm really triggered, I'm not really sure why, or you know, so this conversation, something that we're talking about, I need some time to know my heart. I'll call you in 3 days, or I'll send you a text tomorrow when I've had some time to sort this out. So you give the other person some time boundaries on how long they have to sit in the unknown before, but make it clear that you're not running away, you're not avoiding it, but you have a practice of gaining clarity before trying to sort out issues coming up. So I like to call this a sacred pause. I think it's really important, and that it doesn't go over well if I just ask for it in the moment with no context. It works best when I build that in to the relationship from the beginning. And so that's just understood. Oh, she's doing that thing, just like she said she was going to do. So once you've taken the sacred pause, the next step is to ask yourself, what story am I telling myself? And that could sound something like, this person has no respect. This person, no, people have no respect. Men have no respect. Like, that's a story. And this is another place where a lot of people bail on this journey. And they're like, no, it's not a story. This is true. Because this happened and this happened and this happened. And I have had enough experiences where this is my truth. And I'm just like, well, then I can't help you because that's a perspective that has come about through unpleasant or wounding experiences. And it's not, I don't believe that truth works that way. And I don't believe that feelings and assessments work that way. So we're just not in agreement. If somebody's like, well, that's not a story, that's my truth. It's just like, yeah, okay. The rest of the things I have to say won't be that helpful. But if you can start to identify just, okay, I'm in a story that this person has, that this perspective they have is lacking empathy, and that furthermore, they lack empathy for everyone and whatever. Or any of those things. Or I have a story that if this person really loved me, then they would be able to see what a challenging time I'm having, and they wouldn't be asking me, they wouldn't be coming to the table with a lot of needs and requests from me right now, because they would see that I'm exhausted, and they would care, and they would be asking me what they can do for me. Those are all stories that I hear and experience or have, just as some examples. And so once we have acknowledged that it's a story to ourselves, that is when we start to be able to work with what's underneath the story, which is the direct material of our feelings and needs. And so becoming intimate with ourself and vulnerable with ourself and able to sit in the hurt and the unpleasant direct sensation that we're having for long enough to name it is actually what, if we're not doing this work, it's what we're asking of our partners and people that we're relating with. We're asking them to sit with the direct energetic of our pain in a way that we ourselves have not even developed the ability to do. So until we can be there for ourselves in the way that we are hoping and expecting other people to be there for us, then we likely will not attract other people who can hold space for our actual emotional content. So we've identified the story that we're telling ourselves, and then there's sort of like a resource alert if you just signed up for this class or our Patreon for this class, that if you're in this class, that means that you're paying you're at the $4 level, which means that you get everything at the $2 level also. And at the $2 level, so it should just be in your feed also, is flashcards. So it's like pieces of paper that you can cut out to make flashcards that are feelings and needs. And a lot of people that are doing kind of intuitive, magical work around relationship healing will have these endless conversations about like, I got really sick of just hearing myself say, I need this and I need that. And these aren't really like, I'm not really sure if these are needs. That's a folksy approach, and there is a lot of wisdom that can be gained from just sharing the folk approach and the direct experience. But what I'm talking about when I say feelings or needs is a body of information that has been refined through different kinds of practitioners of therapeutic modalities around emotional and mental health for the last 30 years, that has been aggregated under the cnvc.org, so the website for Marshall Rosenberg's nonviolent communication modality, as the universal feelings and needs, meaning that we say, I feel this and I feel that, I feel disrespected, but that disrespected isn't a feeling, it's a story. So when we say I feel disrespected, it means we're looking outward at the other person and avoiding the sitting in and feeling what we actually feel. So if you take away the language, I feel disrespected, and you look at what is actually considered a feeling, it's things like sad, scared, uncomfortable, guarded, anxious, nervous, titillated, excited. And it's actually pretty radical for me. And I would even say scary, to take away the story sometimes, because the story is like a baby blanket. It's protecting us. And so the more triggered I am, the harder it is to do this really basic practice, which is why we made the flashcards. Because for us, if we're triggered, if we're activated, it feels very big and entheogenic and multidimensional and psychedelically, painfully, ecstatically weird. And the idea that this is actually just about one or two feelings, I reject it in the moment. I'm like, no, 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 no. This is this whole big karmic hairball, and it's like, so whatever. And so I resist. And when there's something physical I can do, it's like, well, I feel bad. So I'm going to walk over to my meditation station. I'm going to sit down on my rug. I'm going to reach in my basket. I have, these bags of cards. I'm going to get out the cards. And all I need to do right now is just look at my two piles and pull out everything I'm feeling and pull out everything I'm needing. And it's always extremely illuminating. And for me personally, the most illuminating thing is that I never am feeling one or two or three things. If I'm feeling triggered, I'm typically feeling like between 10 and 30 things simultaneously. And that has given me a lot of empathy for myself as to why it might be difficult for me to show up in a simultaneous real-time communication and advocate for myself. Because my emotions break my system. I short circuit because I feel so many things at once. So the cards help me to deconstruct that overwhelm and trigger and start to understand why I reacted the way I did, why I said what I said. And so once I've identified my feelings and needs, and again, this is a practice, and the practice, I really encourage you not to set out on this practice with a goal of using this in a really important conversation in your life soon, like tomorrow. We're in Venus retrograde. It's like not necessarily the time to like have the big one, like just to use the random example from earlier, like I'm leaving you because this marriage because I'm gay. Like it's not the moment to do that. It's the moment to go deeper into the evaluation of what's coming up and what we're needing in preparation for a time that will come after Venus retrograde, where we will use these tools. So the intention, if it's not to use them right away, to have that evolutionary conversation like tomorrow, if it can be avoided, is actually to practice developing and really integrating into your conversations that you have with yourself and your self-talk, a language of feelings and needs as a default, instead of having to go through the process of like swimming in the stories, identifying the stories, deconstructing and taking off the stories, getting down to the feelings and needs. When we do that enough times, we grow our vocabulary for our emotions. We become fluent in speaking a language of emotions, and we have access, greater access when we're triggered to real language about what we're feeling that creates empathy rather than resistance in the people that we're speaking to. So when we speak from our feelings and needs, it enables other people, it bypasses their walls because they're not being blamed and attacked. So they're able to actually hear what you're saying without being defensive and participate in the evolutionary potential of the conversation. So what I'm suggesting is every single time you get triggered for the next 10 or 20 days, that you stop what you're doing and go to the car or the bathroom or lock your office door or wherever and pull out these cards that you can print out and cut up and carry with you in a little pouch. And what we'll be giving out as a resource for everybody that's coming to this class is this handout. We're just going to post it in the same post in Patreon at the bottom of the post that will have the recording. So if you want to revisit this recording in the future, it'll just be there. And you'll have access to it for as long as you're supporting us here. And you can print these pages also indefinitely. Like you can just keep printing them out. And it's called Feeling Triggered, My Self-Awareness Journal. And it explains a little bit about that this comes from the NVC modality and what we're talking about right now, some little refresher about a story versus a feeling. And it's just a little journal where you can do these steps that I'm explaining, where you identify the specific trigger. Sometimes it can take me as long as 2 weeks to identify the specific trigger because my emotional process can get so murky, and especially if it's someone that there's a lot of intimacy with. So if there's a sexual connection, and then there's an emotional rapport, and then there's topics, ongoing topics of challenge that are being dropped in, I can hear something I don't like, freeze and shut down, and then not be enjoying the relationship and be pantomiming dates or things that I was excited about doing before, so I show up for them anyway for a few days or even weeks before I have the time and space to say, like, why am I not enjoying this relationship as much as I used to be? Why am I not looking forward to this date that I was really excited about? And identify, and they shared with me that text from of what their mom said about that, my picture, or my art project or whatever. I thought that was really had no value. And I thought, if they really loved me, then why would they share with me something someone else said that was mean about me? Why wouldn't they just keep that to themselves? So this person is not a mature enough to protect the sacred space of my heart, whatever. Like, this process can take so long for me to sort out. So identifying the specific trigger is really important, because if you go to another person and you're just like, I feel terrible, I'm really upset, it's your fault because you never clean the kitchen, and I just I can't even stand you anymore because you're so gross. Like, if we're getting to that point where things are coming out in that kind of way, it's not workable for them, because you're not sharing with them exactly what it is you're talking about or what would address the situation. So when we can come to the table with a very specific circumstance that's debatable. So it's, to say, you're gross, that's an assessment and it's debatable, and someone's going to feel defensive. But if you say, when I come into the kitchen and I see moldy dishes in the sink from 4 days ago after I get back from vacation, I feel frustrated and unimportant. That's unimportant to the story. I feel frustrated and angry. That is something that another person can't deny. You've stated a fact about what occurred, and you've stated facts about what happened in you in response to what occurred. And this is the only basis, in my experience, for actually continuing forward in these conversations without defensiveness, and a battle ensuing, a back and forth about, like, well, how dare you say that, or whatever. So to identify the specific trigger and share it without blame in a really factual way, it requires that we have taken on a precept that says, I am holding myself accountable to ensuring that all of my verbal communications with others are both truthful and respectful at all times. So you may or may not agree with that statement. That might not be where you're at. Again, that's cool, because we can only take so many vows in our life, and or choose what the tools or paths will be to get us where we most want to go. But this is one that I have really taken on. It doesn't mean I'm always successful in it. I fail regularly, but I acknowledge that in those instances, I apologize, because it is my intention to speak truthfully and respectfully to all people at all times, and I didn't do that yesterday. Because I was triggered, and here's what I'm going to do next time to ensure that the thing that happened yesterday doesn't happen again. So after identifying the specific trigger on our little feelings and needs awareness journal, then we just have a process that is inspired by and intimately harmonious with the nonviolent communication modality, where there's questions that we're asking ourselves. What's the story I'm telling myself? What bodily sensations am I noticing? What feelings am I having, and what needs am I having? And I really encourage you not to just riff on feelings and needs, but to actually use the flashcards every time to make sure that what you're calling is a feeling, and what you're calling a need is an actual need and not a preference or desire. Because like I said, when we speak from those places of what's actually a feeling, what's actually a need, like, it has this magical effect of making it so other people can actually hear what we're trying to say. So that's why I'm like really excited about that, and saying like, actually use the flashcards, please. It really helps, even though it feels exceptionally nerdy if you're not like a Virgo. uh, or a Virgo rising like me. And so then there is an area of like, on here, this is imagine what the other person may be feeling. And I definitely want to speak to that and say like, this one is the trickiest one in the whole nonviolent communication modality, because what it really is holding space in your process for us to make space for empathy, where even if we're really convinced that other person stole something from me, which means they don't respect me, and that's the truth, or whatever, something that's just like, no, this happened, and my story is the truth. There's always another side of the story. And actually, this is a real example that I don't think is in the handouts I'm going to give you, but it's in some of our bigger classes around this, of like having a date. I've been on several dates with the person. They were visiting me for the weekend, being like deep in the flow, magical picnic in the woods, staying at my house after, making tea, whatever. They left in the morning. That went really great. I went out to my car, and my car was like all ransacked in the middle. And I had like left them in my car to like jump out and do something the night before, and then not gone back in the car. And then when I came out to the sidewalk, they were kind of standing outside the car and no longer in it. So there was no other way in my mind that I had left them in the car. They were rifling through the glove compartment. I came out quicker than they expected, and they quickly kind of just got out of the car. And I was so violated and devastated, and I was so close to calling every single person I knew in the community and blacklisting this person because they were like wanting to be a teacher around, healing stuff. And it took everything in my power to not do this, because I've been that person that somebody has judged and had a story about and gone around to my friends and tried to say this person did this terrible thing or whatever. I've been on the other side of it. So everything in my power to not do this and just hold my value that says there's always another side of the story. I cannot fathom what happened here, but I have to make space to hear their side of the story before I like burn them to the ground. And I did. And it's too long of a story to share, but as it turns out, it was not them. And it was like, I left the car unlocked, and homeless people go up and down my street and open the car doors and look, and they don't steal anything because they're just looking for stuff to keep their nests warm. And if you don't have any blankets, they leave everything else. So it took me like 3 months to figure out what actually happened, to hear that was happening in my neighborhood. But basically, it's just like, we really have to have a stage in the process where we try to imagine that we're totally wrong, no matter what happened. And like that we are coming, like seeing things through the lens of our own traumas, that we're activated by some weird childhood shit, not them. So imagining what the other person may be feeling, why it's sticky and tricky is because it's really close to projecting. and projecting a story onto another person. So it's not meant to do anything other than just make a little bit of room in your process until you can talk to them and hear their side of the story. This is a placeholder for a time of active listening in the actual communication with the other person. And then the last spaces here are like, what is a request that I could make of this person or situation, or self-loving action that I can take to take care of myself. So I'm such a geek for this stuff that I could get really excited for the opportunity to like do the work in a relationship, and I can identify some areas where that goes off with these last steps, where if I don't come to the table with a request, sometimes I can feel really generous. I can be like, yeah, you know, you did this thing that really hurt me, but like, actually, I understand. I know you're having a really hard time. I know you didn't mean it. So, like, I don't really need anything from you. I just need to feel heard and seen. That was something I would do a lot. But it just turned out that it was a little bit disingenuous, I discovered over the years, because then I would continue to feel incomplete with the conversation. But it's because I didn't ask them to do anything different or to help me in any way. So, and they feel a little bit incomplete with the conversation too, because they're like, wow, okay, you shared with me that like I did something unintentionally that really hurt you, and I hear that you're fine now, so I'm sorry. But it kind of dangles, and um, and it can feel a little bit like you just want to share that you were upset, but now the other person is upset that they upset you, and there's nothing they can do. So when we provide them with a request, like when I came home after 4 days and the dishes in the sink were moldy, and I felt really frustrated and angry, would you be willing to agree to do all of your own dishes within 48 hours of creating them? Because that's something that I'm really looking for in a roommate. And if that's not something that you're interested in trying out with me, like I likely won't want to live with you for that much longer. Those are all boundaried requests that we can make because we're just speaking about what we need. And, you know, if the other person is not a yes to doing that, it's okay. You don't have to keep living together, but you're not judging them as a horrible, disgusting, disrespectful person. And then sometimes you really, truly don't need anything from them. And this comes in where whatever has occurred, you can unpack it, you can take self-responsibility, but you are aware somehow through the process that you just don't like this person very much. Like that happens. And it can feel like we're abandoning a relationship or that we're misunderstood or judged the other person, but sometimes you went through a few challenges, you spoke to them, it went okay, but you just find that like there's nothing that makes me so interested in this person that makes me want to keep relating with them and keep doing the work to keep this open channel and show up in this way, or you know, get to know how to harmonize with each other. Like why are we trying to harmonize? Like, do we have a shared goal? Do we have a child? Do we own a business together? No. Like a lot of times for me this would happen with relationships where it was someone I just thought was really cool, like, or was like a fan of in the community. Like I'm a fan of their music or a recipient of their healing modality. And like, I just really respect what they do. And so I would feel as if we had to be friends and we had to be able to make a relationship work because I just thought they were so great. But sometimes we have enough of these little conversations, or we're just getting triggered by someone all the time and we're unpacking it and realizing like, I don't really want to make a request of them. I don't really want to do this work with this person. Like there's like, I think I've just seen enough to see that like we're not that compatible. We don't have that much in common. I'm not enjoying this. So that's where it comes in, where we're doing the work to prepare to have the conversation. And then maybe in doing the work, we're realizing, I don't know that there's a point in having this conversation. So what self-loving action can I take to take care of myself? I'm going to tell this person that I'm moving out in 6 months and I'm going to start looking for apartments, or I'm going to stop trying to make lunch dates with this person that never initiates lunch dates with me, and just go to their workshops when I want to enjoy their offering. This is a real and healthy outcome that can happen when we're doing these precursors. We might come to the point where we're like, we don't actually need to have this conversation. It's not really about them. And I learned that I have a boundary here, or I learned something about my values, and I'm going to take that forward into what I look for in my next friendship or relationship. So we're getting close to the end here. This is something I could talk about for years, so I hope it wasn't too much or too little for your needs. I want to open the space to for any like burning questions, ahas, like things that you feel like you'd really like to share that would help you feel complete with this experience before we wrap up. And so you can just unmute yourself if you like, because we'll just take a couple. So whoever goes first, let's try that.
Hello. Can you hear me? Am I unmuted? Yes, I am. So
yes, I hear you.
I just have a question to that last point that you made. If you're doing this work and you are realizing that actually a relationship or a deeper relationship with this person isn't necessary and isn't serving you, do you feel like it is, and this is kind of like a question relating to like personal power, does it help our personal power to be having a conversation with that person to state that we don't want to know, like no longer like continue with that person? Or like, yeah, is there beauty in kind of just leaving things? Yeah.
That's a good question. I spoke to this a little bit in the last circle, and I definitely think it's like individual choice, and how far do you want to go into like what you desire your communications and relationships to be doing to the planetary universal multiverse. Like how much impact or little impact would you like to have on the oneness? And so what I shared in the last time was that I've recently decided in my last handful of relationships that that I felt that the other people, although that started out on a foot of valuing communication and like kind of enjoying this kind of work and process to a certain degree, eventually there would be like a life happens kind of thing that would come up, like I'm having a baby or whatever, that would cause them to have less bandwidth for really being open and taking the time to go all the way or have the full conversation or come to completion or healing. And so there would be a kind of like giving up on the process that I couldn't really blame. It's just like, I get it. Like, you lost your job and now you need to like start a whole new career, and you don't have as much time to just like philosophically amble in this like having healing conversations regularly space. And that I felt that those people were slightly, this is a judgment that shows I'm not like totally done processing it, but that they were not as courageous as I would have hoped in being honest with me about what it was about the relationship that made it no longer a priority for them. Like I felt like they were just kind of maybe trying not to hurt my feelings. So being like, I'm moving and I'm starting a new job and I think I just really want a clean slate, or saying things that were like, yeah, sure, that makes sense. But where I felt like I knew them well enough to be like, there's this and this, and like I could, if you're annoyed with me, just tell me. Like, I don't know, things where I wanted to it would have been like more helpful for me, and I would have got more closure if they were able to state the actual reason why they weren't that interested, or they weren't as interested as they once were. Like, oh, you know what, like, I don't think our sense of humors are actually that big of a match, and I'm learning through this interaction that that's actually really important to me. Like, that would have really hurt. And it has really hurt when people say stuff like that, but it's like the ripping the band-aid off versus like digging around slowly. Like, it's something that it hurts in the moment, like a clean cut. And then I like can sometimes wake up like the next day or like a week later and be like, well, I'm not for everyone. Like, I can process and digest it much better. And so because that's what I have found, I've been trying to offer that to people, and mostly like they don't seem to appreciate it, but that's not my business. It's the best I've got in terms of what I think actually does less harm. So I have been holding myself accountable to trying to show up, to say, someone's like, hey, I'm coming over, and I'm like, cool, I know we had that plan, but like there's something coming up for me, so I'm gonna need to do that first. So do you still want to do that tonight, or do you want to do it like another time? Like, because like just to try to make that space to be in person, and then say truthfully and respectfully, when X, Y, and Z, I feel X, Y, and Z. It didn't used to be a priority for me, but now it is. And I think I'd really just rather focus on the relationships where it's really natural for the person to show up in that way, because I'm hearing you that you just don't really want to show up in that way, and that's okay. So giving a specific reason for me is a practice, and it's a new practice, and I can't quite say like how the other people, if other people really enjoy and appreciate it, or if they think it's like super evil of me. Like, I don't know, because I think a lot of people think it's like our job to just say as little as possible so as not to hurt the other person, and then just like back away slowly. And I just don't like that feeling of like, I'm just going to give a fake reason and then run away as fast as I can and never talk to you again. So yeah, it depends if the other person will let you show up to articulate your truth about what's not working, or if they just kind of perceive, uh-oh, something's not working, and then they run away before. So it's kind of an act of generosity and maturity if the other person will even allow you to state your reasons for changing direction. We'll take one more if there is one more, and then transition. Going once.
I'll go.
Going twice. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey. I feel like you've spoke on this throughout the call, but just a little more specifically, if we have some type of relationship we're in, and the other person has like no concept of this, so it's really hard to even get into a space like this because there's just not that reciprocity and whatnot. Is there a way to create a space where it feels like there can be maybe a little more feeling of being safe, because there's a space where it's like you're creating an opportunity for both people to be vulnerable and just open up in that way? Does that make sense?
It's a good question. It is. My answer is maybe like could be more moderate, but my sense is that like a really good place to start, if neither person is like going really deep into this on their own for their own reasons, is with mediation, and that having a neutral third party to help facilitate over the bumps, and be the one to say, how about trying this tool right now? Because if someone's triggered by you, they will not like being facilitated by you. That will feel like you're controlling. Typically it's like you're trying to control, you're doing that weird thing. And so really can't say enough about mediation, whatever that means. A marriage and family counselor, if it's in the workplace, if you have HR and they have mediation available. And a lot of times people are like, well, there's like, my husband will never go to therapy, he will never read NBC. It's I wish I had a more moderate answer, but my question is like, is this a relationship that you can be fulfilled in then? If this, like, you know, and it's only you can answer that. Like, how much do you need to have really open, intimate, vulnerable sharing with your partner in order to get some satisfaction out of the relationship? Yeah. Oh, I will add to that that you can absolutely walk this path as one, like alone within relationship, and it always feels ideal if the other person celebrates the tools and wants to try them too. But I found that the worst experiences I had was when I was like thinking I kind of got this and that I like deserved to be relating with somebody who would do it too, and I was just policing the other person. Like I was just like, that's blame language, that's a story. And I would do that even pretty recently. The person would be like doing their emotional thing and I'd be like, that's a story. I just get so triggered by them not using nonviolent communication or using self-responsible tools. And I attracted a lot of relationships then where the other person was in that same spot of partially developed skill set and policing one another's use of the tools. And that, I believe, had to happen. It was a step I had to go through to get to the point where I really said, these are my values and I'm going to show up this way. And any relationship that I have with anyone at any level of consciousness or interest in these tools can be a means for me to develop my commitment to these and for me to grow strong in my ability to communicate in a way that's truthful and respectful in all circumstances. And like little by little, that has been the thing that has worn down like the most stubborn person in my life, is like when I just completely gave up on trying to get them to do any of the processes with me, and I just like, they're the person that triggers me the most in the whole world, and I just would walk into the room with my clipboard with my feelings and needs and just be like so triggered by their face and everything they said to me and just be like, I feel like, just read it off my clipboard because I'm just like, this is the best I can do, and I'm gonna prostrate myself to this process. No, I don't know if I went too far in any one direction with that. Was that helpful at all for you? Okay. All right. So in closing, I will share, and you're welcome to go if you have to, because it's now 14 minutes over. But I will just share a brief moment of gratitude for all of you. And if you're open to the idea of that this has all been a healing ritual where we've been shining light on dynamics that the potential for which exists in many of our lives and relationships, and illuminating and bringing to the surface and disrupting patterns, loosening attachments or shame around what's coming up in our lives, then I will share that is that for me. It's a ritual, it's a prayer, it's a way of really amplifying our understanding of the challenges that we're facing and our commitment to continuing to develop ourselves, to call in tools, and so invite you into an image of the body as the tree of life, and that our roots are deep in the soil and our branches are reaching wildly in so many different directions, and that the rains come and the sun scorches and the winds blow us in different directions, but that we are able to, with these tools, endure the process of being pruned and being shaped, and cutting away what is excess, what is distracting, what is untrue or no longer serving or never served our intention for connection, for intimacy, for fulfillment, for beautiful co-creative experiences and projects, and allowing our plant, our organism, our tree to be pruned so that when the next wave of evolutionary growth energy comes, when the rains come, when the soil is once again rich with nutrients, that we can grow taller and come to take our true form and feel stability and strength accumulating within this process of pruning, releasing, and calling in, renewing, rejuvenating energies, maybe identifying one or two things that we in this moment are releasing our grip on, releasing our attachment or identification to, if it's a habit, if it's a way of being, if it's a vision that is just not aligning with what's possible and real in this moment, if it's fear of intimacy, fear of being injured, fear of connection, fear of abandonment, any judgments of our partners or co-conspirators and collaborators in life, whatever it might be for you, just see if there's one or two or three things you can actively say, I release in this moment, whether I release through the roots, whether I release by dropping leaves, whether I release by inviting and accepting the great pruning that is available to us in this Venus retrograde, in this coronation portal. And calling in the spirit of water to come and to moisten our roots and help us to feel that the life is still present, that we have all we need to grow when the time is right, and that this process of releasing and refining, gathering our strength to grow into our true form is always available to us. And invite you all, if you have some water in your glass still, to just see, feel into the waters everywhere, the clean, clear, flowing, living waters, wherever they may be on this earth, and acknowledge the ability that we have to take them into our body and allow their intelligence to wash away what has been and leave us fresh for what is becoming. And when you feel that you have a clear intention for whatever it is, for growth, for strength, for repair, for vulnerability, for courage, to just drink all the water that feels comfortable. And invite you all to drink as much water as possible for the rest of the day, and take a shower, take a bath, see what you can do to bring the best of what you have into those waters, whether that's putting some crystals in your bath or some herbs, and really allow for this process to be a subtle one that continues for the next 24 hours or so. And we invite you to leave any comments or questions or links or resources that you feel excited to share with your people sharing this circle in the present or future, to just leave them on the original post, so that that can really be a resource for anybody that is needing this conversation or might find it in the future. And we'll check back there and make sure to answer any questions for the next few days at least. And we hope to see some of you next month. We have a couple of potential things we may be sharing about, just based on what the collective is experiencing a month from now. But it'll be in this vein around boundaries, around different kinds of unconventional supportive relationships we can create that will facilitate our doing differently going forward. And we also have some herbal medicines that we'll be making available just to the patrons, with some discounts coming up, including the one that we had hoped to put out for Beltane, but we just got the message that it wasn't time, that it was maturing slowly and needed to accumulate a little bit more of the plants that are coming through this period of time, that they're going to have the energy that will help us to develop our relationship skills through these specific global challenges. So that's coming, and I hope that it meets you where you're at. And if not, that you have all the support that you need through whatever means it would be most organic and integratable and enjoyable for you. Thank you so much for coming into our space and sharing yourselves. Amen. Blessed be Aho. Namaste. It's finished in beauty. Blessings.